Get that monkey away from my table. Some people need to remember their station. Veronica Whitfield's French-tipped fingers tightened around her stemmed glass as she rose at the VIP table. Without a flicker of hesitation, she tipped a full pour of Cabernet onto Dane Roberts's head. Wine sluiced down his face, saturating a suit that cost more than most cars, splashing the linen like crimson spill. Did you really think you belonged here? She set the glass down with a crisp click. The gala froze. Conversations died. Screens lifted, capturing everything. Burgundy streaked down his cheeks, pooling at his collar, before dripping in steady beats to the white cloth, an inkblot of humiliation spreading wider. Did you think this was your crowd? Veronica asked, each syllable barbed. The Fairmont's grand ballroom became a stage under chandelier glare, every whisper silenced, every watcher a judge. Phones hovered, red lights winking. Dane didn't flinch. The room inhaled and held it, that shared intake before a storm. Veronica's smirk widened, convinced she'd defended pedigree. She had no idea she'd just set a fuse beneath her family's empire. The man with wine running from his jawline wasn't some party crasher angling for proximity to power. He was the one person capable of collapsing the Whitfield dynasty with a word, a pen stroke, a simple report. For 3 generations, their name had lived on government contracts, steel, composites, guidance systems, a lineage of profit built on war's machinery. Veronica thought she'd swatted away pretenders. In truth, she had spit in the face of the gatekeeper who could lock every door. She didn't realize that the room's quiet wasn't fear of her, but awe of him. Have you ever watched naked bigotry torch everything it touches? Roll back 12 hours. The Tech Innovation Charity Gala, Silicon Valley's crown jewel fundraiser. $1,000 a plate, invitation only, where deals were whispered over sturgeon, where venture dreams shook hands with procurement reality. The Fairmont glittered, cut crystal, polished brass, velvet hush. Veronica swept in like she owned square footage and oxygen. In some ways, she did. Third-generation heir to Whitfield Defense Systems, Veronica was accustomed to bowing heads and parted crowds, but the numbers back at headquarters had begun to hiss. Veronica Whitfield, mid-40s and immaculately sculpted, cut the room like a yacht through still water. Sheer to Whitfield Defense Systems, among America's largest arms suppliers, a company born building ammunition, matured into aircraft, crowned by missile programs. Her great-grandfather sold bullets. Her grandfather perfected airframes. Her father carved dominance with guidance tech. Now Veronica was expected to carry the torch. Trouble. The balance sheet bled. 3 massive contracts had slipped away. The Pentagon wanted faster, smarter, software-defined warfare. Autonomy, cyber, swarms, not legacy steel. The old playbook felt heavy. Jonathan Whitfield, Veronica's husband, and the company's CEO needed something biblical. Tomorrow's announcement is our lifeline, he had said in the car, his voice low, a tremor buried beneath CEO cadence. The Defense Innovation Unit names the prime for the next autonomous UAV program. If they pick us, it anchors a decade. Veronica half listened. Her attention orbit was social gravity, pulled toward the pecking order ballet. She wanted every camera to see where she sat, which general she air-kissed, who circled her table. Saving the company could wait until the dessert course. As the evening idled forward, Veronica conducted a symphony of small cruelties. She sent back her champagne, twice, murmuring about the Latino server's unkept hands. She wondered aloud if the black valet had finished anything past homeroom. A young Asian founder approached with practiced courage. Veronica suggested she'd do a killer job with back of house. Each line arrived with a poised smile that never warmed her eyes. This wasn't improvisation. It was ritual. Humiliate to ascend. Yet the person who would matter most hadn't arrived. The story's hinge waited by the marble entry. At 8:47 p.m., Dane Roberts entered, tailored navy, easy posture, quiet confidence. He didn't hunt conversation. Conversation found him. People nodded with the unstudied respect that can't be faked. Procurement chiefs, founders whose signatures move markets, uniformed brass who don't waste time. Cards appeared and disappeared. Heads leaned in. To Veronica, the sight was an affront to natural order. Who invited him? She breathed to Margaret Duval, willowy and titanium cold, a collector of charity boards and inherited disdain. Margaret tilted her head, earrings whispering. Diversity optics, darling. There's always a quota. Veronica watched. Irritation curdled into mission. Dane wasn't hustling like the climbers she swatted aside. He was being courted. She flagged Jonathan with lacquered nails. Do you know that man? By the silent auction. The black one in navy. Jonathan pinched his brow. Please, not tonight. We cannot afford theatrics. Veronica's decision had already landed. Throughout dinner, she stalked his table with her gaze. He sat with 3 Pentagon officials and 2 tech CEOs from recent magazine covers, the conversation tight, strategic, like a briefing. It should have included her surname. Excuse me, Veronica rose, glass in hand, smile fixed like porcelain. A seating mix-up, I think. The ballroom didn't yet know it was about to witness the scariest thing in corporate America. Prejudice amplified on camera. Veronica failed a test she didn't know she was taking. Dane had been watching, not with malice, but with the cool note-taking of a man trained to assess people under pressure. How you treat staff, how you flex power, whether you show contempt when you think nobody with leverage is looking. She was naked to him. He'd logged 3 deployments through hot zones, brokered ceasefires inside rooms humming with threat, outlasted slights that would fracture softer men. He had learned that character emerges when people believe consequences are off stage. Veronica was Exhibit A. She approached like a judge with an engraved gavel, wine curved like a blade in her hand. Dane remained still, centered, expression almost curious. He understood the cadence, the preamble, the insinuation, the crescendo. She thought she was about to correct a seating mistake. She was about to reveal an institutional one. Her heels clicked, a metronome of privilege, toward the Pentagon-heavy table. The wine caught chandelier light, a red cyclone barely contained by crystal. Pardon me, she announced, volume calibrated for bystander microphones. There seems to be confusion with tonight's seating. 5 faces lifted. 3 uniforms, 2 tech titans, and Dane. Their collective attention inflated Veronica's confidence. I'm Veronica Whitfield, Whitfield Defense Systems. 70-plus years supplying the Department of Defense. My great-grandfather's ammunition turned the tide in World War II. A silver-haired colonel nodded, polite, guarded. Veronica's eyes stayed locked on Dane. I couldn't help noticing a placement error, Veronica continued. VIP seating is typically reserved for active primes and senior leadership, not, she let the pause ripen, charity guests. The air condensed, phones materialized like orchids blooming, silent, hungry. Dane folded his hands. My invitation specifies table 12. Is there a problem, ma'am? Your invitation? Veronica's tone made it a joke. Who sponsored you? I'm seeing real brass, real decision-makers. Her gesture cut toward him, sank, and then you. Defense Innovation Unit, Dane said evenly. They extended the invitation. She knew DIU, the Pentagon's tech spear, modernizers of procurement, yet her brain parsed it as public relations, not power. I see. And you represent what outfit? Which program put you here? I'm here in my capacity as... Let me guess, she overrode, voice climbing for the peanut gallery. A diversity contractor, angling for mouthfuls, at the grown-ups table. A community optics program designed to make the department look inclusive? The tech execs shifted. The uniforms stiffened, almost imperceptibly. This was becoming something not easily forgotten and impossible to ignore. Actually, ma'am, I'm evaluating potential partners for our next major defense initiative, Dane replied, patience intact, bearing unmistakably military now. Evaluate, Veronica laughed, edges sharp enough to cut. What qualifies you to evaluate anything in this sector? An online certification? A colonel cleared her throat. Perhaps we return to our prior discussion. Veronica waved her off, acrylics flashing. No, let's be plain. Too many unqualified people get seats because of skin tone, not merit. Not fair to companies like mine that earned our place. The nearest tables went soundless, lenses steady. Margaret ghosted to her shoulder. Veronica, love, maybe... No, Mags. The octave climbed. I've watched him all night, schmoozing like he belongs, like he earned proximity to actual decision-makers. Newsflash. Dane rose, unhurried, presence expanding, frame taller than Veronica expected, posture ironed by years. Mrs. Whitfield, I think there's a miss. Don't interrupt me. She stabbed a finger at his chest. Do you even know who you're speaking to? My family served this country before you people could vote, before you people were allowed in the same buildings as Americans. The words uncoiled like toxin. Even Margaret flinched. Veronica, please, Jonathan called, forcing through the crowd, face already ashen. No, Jonathan. Someone has to say what the rest won't. She hoisted her wine glass, red cresting. I'm tired of pretending quotas produce competence. I'm tired of undeserving people taking chairs that belong to families like mine. Security began moving, but the human sea slowed them to a crawl. Get this monkey away from my table, she declared, voice ringing under crystal. Learn your place. It's not here, playing pretend. The glass tilted. The Cabernet fell in a perfect arc. It soaked hair, traced cheekbones, bled into navy wool. It splattered the linen like an abstract of arrogance. Did you really think you belonged? Veronica placed the empty flute with theatrical care. Did you really think anyone bought your costume? Silence became cathedral thick. Forks hovered, suspended like guilty knowledge. 300 of the country's most powerful watched cruelty try to crown itself. Dane did something she hadn't gamed out. He smiled, not bitter, not tight, the smile of a teacher grading a test. Interesting choice, Mrs. Whitfield, he said, drawing a handkerchief with unfussy precision, dabbing in calm, methodical strokes. Very revealing. Security closed, but he lifted a palm. No need, gentlemen. Mrs. Whitfield was simply articulating her views on contracting qualifications and racial hierarchies. Sir, we can escort. Unnecessary. He finished with the cloth, folded it with military neatness. Her position is clear, educational, truly. Veronica basked, adrenaline humming. Around her, a few brittle smiles tried to hold. This, to her mind, was leadership. Order restored with a public correction. Ok, I'm glad we clarified, Veronica announced, projecting. Sometimes directness beats euphemism. But applause didn't come. The uniforms looked stricken. The tech CEOs stared like they'd witnessed a felony mid-banquet. Jonathan reached the table, breath shallow. Veronica, what have you done? What had to be done, she said, riding the high. I defended the hierarchy. I protected our reputation. Jonathan turned to Dane, remorse etched deep. Sir, I'm profoundly sorry. My wife didn't. Your wife meant every word, Dane said gently. Character reads truest when people assume they're consequence-proof. Jonathan paled to paper. Character assessment? Dane straightened his tie, the tiniest adjustment, then looked him dead in the eye with quiet authority that makes seasoned soldiers sit straighter. It's been illuminating, Mr. Whitfield. We've learned what we needed regarding Whitfield Defense's culture and leadership philosophy. He pivoted, paused near Veronica. Some errors can't be undone. I hope the poor felt worth it. He walked away, strides measured. Phones everywhere already pushed uploads. Hashtags spun into being. Dar's Winegate sharpened its teeth, about to devour a surname, a balance sheet, a future. Veronica, high on her own narrative, had no clue she'd just detonated a 70-year legacy in front of 300 witnesses. The question wasn't if she'd crossed a line, it was whether the Whitfields could survive the blaze. By dawn, Veronica had become the most disliked woman on American internet. Clips saturated timelines. X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, each angle uglier than the last. Winegate perched at number 1, ahead of a celebrity implosion and a West Coast storm. Worse than the poor was her encore. She doubled down like a dare. At 2:00 a.m., while Jonathan begged for restraint, Veronica posted, Sometimes you must stand for what's right. Real Americans shouldn't apologize for defending our values. The gorgeous truth, and some matters, there was real talk, no apologies. The comments detonated. 30,000 responses by sunrise, most demanding boycotts of Whitfield Defense. Screenshots metastasized. Meanwhile, the stock started to sag in pre-market like a tired sail. Jonathan stared at numbers he'd hoped never to see. Down 8, 12, 15%. Algorithmic wolves smelled blood and sold. Board members pinged, Investors snarled. Executives panicked. What was she thinking? No one knew. Jonathan ordered a deep dive on the man from the gala. Everything on him: background, employment, social, the works. The private intel firm returned 3 hours later with almost nothing. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, no X. Public records were bare scaffolding. Detroit birth, West Point graduate, long service. That was it. No one has this little footprint, Jonathan muttered. Not in 2024. His assistant swallowed. There's a reason. People with high-level clearances get scrubbed. DIA, NSA, certain joint commands, ghosts on purpose. Ice crept Jonathan's spine. You think he's government? I'd bet. Too late for careful. Veronica was already on a local morning show, chin lifted, righteousness loaded like a weapon. I stand by it, she told the anchor. He was out of place. Someone had to say what everyone's thinking. Diversity programs are out of control. The clip went viral for the worst reasons. Jonathan's phone rang, an unlisted number with the gravity of a summons. Mr. Whitfield, Colonel Paula Haynes, Pentagon personnel. We need an immediate meeting regarding your contracts. His mouth went dry. May I ask why? Last night's incident involving General Roberts. The call died. Jonathan stared at the screen. General. The man his wife soaked and slurred was a general. He dialed Veronica, busy hopping from podcast to YouTube show, recasting herself as offended patriot. She's lost the plot, he told his brother Marcus, COO. If he's truly a general, if he touches contracting. Marcus's voice was gravel. I'm seeing tremors already. 3 major subs asked to reassess. Aurora Group canceled next week's sit-down. Boeing's procurement wants to explore alternative supply chain. Reputation in their industry wasn't a note. It was the entire song. By midday, the story chewed through CNN, Fox, MSNBC homepages, Veronica's stills everywhere, the clip looping under neon chyrons. Society donor soaks black man at gala. None of them knew yet that the man wasn't merely anybody. He oversaw $50 billion in annual spend. And at exactly 2:12 p.m., Jonathan would face the consequence. A secure conference room, a table him on one side, reality on the other. Sometimes the hammer falls slowly. That afternoon, it fell like a dropped anvil. Veronica's words had turned into a procurement earthquake. 2 o'clock, Pentagon. Jonathan entered SIF quiet space and met the nightmare in dress blues. The man from the ballroom, dry now, composed, fruit stain a memory, sat at the head, stars precise as coordinates. General Dane Roberts, United States Army. The composure under attack, the unshowy authority, the way senior officials deferred, it all clicked. Please sit, Mr. Whitfield, General Roberts said, voice mild, final. We have much to cover. Jonathan sat, legs suddenly unreliable. General Roberts, my wife's behavior was indefensible. Racist, disgrace. A living exhibit of your company's leadership culture, Roberts said. Around the table, Colonel Haynes of Personnel, a liaison from the Secretary's office, Amanda Carver, and 2 DIU officials. All had watched the spectacle live or online. The Defense Innovation Unit, Roberts began, hands folded, evaluates more than technical specs. We evaluate character, who we trust with billions and with the lives tethered to the systems they build. Jonathan nodded, grieving and desperate. Of course, General. That's rational. Roberts didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Last night, we conducted what we call a cultural assessment across several UAV finalists. DOSH specifically, Roberts continued, a $1.2 billion autonomous drone program. Jonathan's heart stopped mid-beat. This was the contract, the rope over the cliff. Heading into the evening, Whitfield Defense ranked first. Your specs were strong, your price competitive, your past performance exemplary. He paused, letting the past tense hang. Were. Silence settled like a verdict. Character matters. We need partners who treat employees, subcontractors, and fellow citizens with respect, especially when no one powerful seems to be watching. Jonathan felt the floor tilt. The room didn't rage. It didn't need to. It was colder than rage. Your wife's behavior wasn't an isolated lapse, Roberts said. It was an unfiltered transmission of your internal frequency. We saw who leads when the mask slips. Colonel Haynes slid a folder across. Inside, screenshots, transcripts, time-stamped clips. And then she doubled down, Amanda added quietly, pointing to the 2 a.m. post. Boards, primes, sub-tiers are already signaling distance. Marcus's texts vibrated Jonathan's watch. Another supplier pausing receivables. A bank calling covenants. Jonathan swallowed. General, I'm asking for a path forward, corrective action, governance overhaul, whatever it takes to restore confidence. Governance can change, Roberts said. Culture is slower, and culture, for us, is risk. One DIU official tapped a page. Previous internal complaints, 2 quiet settlements, a training vendor terminated mid-engagement. Patterns, she said. Jonathan tried to explain them as anomalies. It sounded like excuses even to him. We're also stewards of the signal we send, Roberts added. Who we empower becomes who others emulate. If we reward contempt, we purchase more of it. Jonathan had no counter-argument. There are rooms where spin evaporates. This was one. Numbers didn't matter anymore. Values did. Effective immediately, Roberts said. DIU is pausing consideration of Whitfield defense for the UAV award pending review by an ethics panel. The words were clean, surgical. Jonathan felt something tear. General, that pause could be terminal. I'm aware, Roberts replied. I'm also aware that soldiers who will rely on these systems deserve partners we can trust without caveat. The liaison's expression was not cruel, just resolved. You will receive formal notice within the hour. Jonathan nodded, gratitude and dread commingled. He had asked for a path, he had been given one, it just wasn't paved for him. Back in California, Veronica was still on camera, the world's least strategic media tour continuing like a runaway train, each segment salting the wound. Investors watched in Slack channels and private chats, typing words like toxic, contagion, firebreak. Subcontractors forwarded clauses. Bankers pulled up exposure dashboards. The Whitfield name, long synonymous with capability, was now trending with a hashtag that smelled like smoke. Inside the company, Slack channels went read-only. PR drafted statements, HR prepared listening sessions. But culture doesn't rebrand in an afternoon. Especially not with the internet holding receipts. Veronica finally saw a sliver of consequence when a favored lifestyle brand announced it was severing ties. She scoffed, called it performative. Then came something she understood. A private school board notifying her that certain comments violated community standards. Margaret texted an emoji-laden, lay low. Veronica replied with a flag and an eagle. She told herself history favored spine, but markets favor judgment, and institutions favor predictability. The Whitfields had become unpredictable, and General Roberts, calm, methodical, had already moved to make unpredictability someone else's problem, somewhere far from taxpayer money and lives. The viral arc accelerated. Journalists dug up panels where Veronica had smirked at box-checking hires. Old audio of a fundraiser joke resurfaced, clipped, context-free, damning anyway. Former employees posted threads about glass ceilings that felt plated in tungsten. Competitors didn't gloat publicly. They didn't need to. Their BD teams simply scheduled extra coffees in Crystal City. In group chats, founders traded cautionary tale emojis. Parents swapped links between drop-off and stand-ups. The clip reached corners of America that never read defense budgets. Everyone recognized contempt when they saw it poured by the glass. By afternoon, cash burn math looked different. A paused award meant lines of credit re-underwritten, supplier terms shortened, recruitment pipelines icing over. Marcus called Jonathan. 2 plants will need staggered furloughs if receivables slow. PR floated a statement that read like a hostage note. Legal killed half the adjectives. Meanwhile, a junior comms lead whispered the only thing that sometimes dislodges a boulder: sincerity. But sincerity requires contrition, and contrition requires a mirror. Veronica's mirror reflected only enemies. We don't bend, she said to a friend on speaker, forgetting the friend had a journalist sibling. That quote appeared an hour later. Markets did what markets do, treated arrogance as a catalyst for risk. The sell-off steadied, then resumed. Jonathan stared at a graph that looked like a ski slope. He began drafting board outreach. Somewhere under the numbness, a practical list formed. Independent chair, emergency culture audit, leadership change, public apology not crafted by counsel. He picked up the phone. The person he dialed first surprised him. An old program officer who had once told him, "Reputation walks in the door 3 minutes before you do." He asked for advice, not cover. The officer didn't offer comfort. "You can't undo the poor," she said. "But you can signal you understand why it matters." She suggested 3 moves: immediate removal of Veronica from all governance roles, a genuine apology centered on harm rather than optics, and tangible commitments, a supplier diversity initiative with teeth backed by dollars and authority. "And you need to talk to Roberts," she added. "Not to salvage the award, to salvage credibility." Jonathan wrote it down. Credibility. It had always felt like a byproduct of performance. He finally saw it was a prerequisite. He walked to the conference room where the board had assembled under emergency protocols. Faces ringed the table, some angry, some frightened, a few grim with clarity. Jonathan didn't filibuster. He proposed an independent chair and tendered his own resignation contingent upon transition. "The company matters more than my job," he said. The words tasted like metal and truth. He recommended Marcus as interim, paired with an external operator to stabilize programs. Then he said what no one expected. "Veronica steps down from every role, today." The room exhaled, some in relief, some in shock. While lawyers began to draft, Jonathan called Veronica. She spat fire through the speaker, disbelief curdling to fury. "You're betraying family." "I'm trying to save 3,000 families," he replied. She hung up. He didn't call back. He emailed General Roberts instead, not to bargain, but to accept responsibility. He asked for a meeting to present changes and to listen. Roberts's aide replied with a time. "When a storm bends your house, you don't argue with the wind, you reinforce the beams." Jonathan finally understood the difference between spin and repair. Evening brought no mercy. A national magazine's homepage posted an op-ed. Elegy for the old defense order. It wasn't about missiles. It was about manners, power, and the new procurement ethos. Competence plus character, or no check. The piece quoted soldiers who cared less about a prime's brand than whether the people inside it would treat them like ends, not means. Comment sections, normally toxic, were weirdly aligned. "If she'll do that in public, what will she justify in private?" someone wrote. The internet doesn't often agree. Tonight it did, for once, on something that mattered. The next morning, Veronica's world shrank. The trainer canceled. The stylist texted, taking a pause. Invitations evaporated. A charity board asked for her resignation before lunch. She drafted another post, angrier, then deleted it, then posted something worse. Screenshots proliferated. She still believed audiences wanted a fighter. They wanted a grown-up. Jonathan's statement hit at noon. An apology that didn't center his pain. A commitment to changes with dates and names. An announcement of his transition and of Veronica's immediate departure from all roles. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked to be judged by actions. The internal town hall that followed was raw. Employees cried, cursed, asked whether the company they'd given their 20s to would live to see their 30s. Marcus answered in concrete nouns: runway, contracts, customer conversations, a plan for keeping paychecks moving. He didn't mention legacy, he mentioned trust. In DMs, engineers who had almost left decided to wait a quarter. A plant lead emailed a list of culture fixes. HR created a path for anonymous reporting with external oversight. None of it would impress a headline. It impressed some hearts that mattered. Meanwhile, Boar's Winegate kept chewing through feeds, but the tone shifted fractionally. Some posts began to separate Veronica from thousands of employees. It wasn't absolution. It was nuance, one of the internet's rarest minerals. Jonathan flew to DC alone. He didn't bring PR. He brought a notebook. In the corridor outside Roberts' office, he rehearsed 3 sentences. "We failed. We are changing. Tell me what accountability looks like to you." When his name was called, he walked in prepared not to speak. It's astonishing how persuasive silence becomes when you've finally learned to listen. He sat. Roberts entered, same quiet authority. No visible triumph, just mission. "General," Jonathan began, "thank you for the time." Roberts nodded. "You know why we're here." "Yes, sir." Jonathan summarized the changes without ornament. He didn't offer excuses. only context where it clarified responsibility, not where it diluted it. Roberts asked blunt questions. Jonathan answered plainly, occasionally with, "I don't know," followed by, "I'll find out." They spoke about systems that make certain behaviors survivable, even profitable, until a camera forces a reckoning. They spoke about the difference between contrition and damage control. Roberts didn't give hints. That wasn't his job. He did lay out standards, as if reading coordinates. Workforce dignity embedded in metrics, supplier inclusion written into spend, leadership measured by how it behaves when unobserved. You can hit deadlines with fear, he said. You can't build resilience with it. Jonathan wrote fast. He felt something like grief loosening, replaced by obligation. As the meeting wound down, Roberts offered neither carrot nor stick. "We'll observe," he said. "We'll remember." Jonathan understood. The door wasn't locked, but it was no longer on a hinge he controlled. Outside, the air felt different, colder, honest. Jonathan phoned Marcus. "We have a shot at long-term credibility if we earn it. Short-term, assume no award." Marcus had gamed for that. "We can keep 2 lines hot if suppliers hold." Some would, some wouldn't. Trust is currency. They were overdrawn. The next days became a grind of calls, walkthroughs, memos that didn't read like memos. Veronica, meanwhile, fumed in a mansion that felt emptier by the hour. Margaret stopped answering. The trainer stayed paused. The mirror finally showed a crack. She looked away. By week's end, the chart stabilized. Still ugly, no longer vertical. A handful of customers reached out privately. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just a request to keep them posted. That's what recovery looks like at first. Less falling. PR wanted to pitch redemption arcs. Jonathan said no. "We don't get redemption. We get work." He met with the junior comms lead, the one who'd suggested sincerity, and asked her to draft internal updates with plain verbs. She did. People read them. A surprising number responded. When leadership stops shouting, other voices grow audible. An email arrived from a small subcontractor in Detroit, a black-owned machine shop that had once lost a bid and still sent a congratulations note. They had seen the clip like everyone else. They also saw the steps since. "If you're serious, we'd like another shot." It wasn't absolution, it was opportunity, the kind that builds better futures than apologies alone. Jonathan forwarded it to procurement with one instruction: level field, real timeline. In a different inbox, a reporter requested comment for a piece about modern contracting standards. Jonathan declined. He wasn't the right voice tonight. He drafted a personal note instead, never sent but written for the soldiers who would eventually fly, maintain, or depend on whatever Whitfield built next. It said, "We lost your trust by showing contempt for people who look like many of you. We will earn a fraction back by how we treat the least powerful in our halls." He saved it. He went home to a house where silence used to feel luxurious and now felt earned. Veronica wasn't there. She'd driven to Margaret's coastal place. Margaret's husband opened the door, said the house was unavailable. Veronica slept in a guest room at a cousin's. She told herself she'd been abandoned because people feared backlash. She didn't allow the more accurate story. People feared proximity to contempt. In the morning, she drafted an apology. It read like a press release, and a threat had a child. She deleted it. She stared at the blank for a long time, then typed something simple and stopped halfway through the second sentence. Outrage is easy. Humility feels like learning to write with your non-dominant hand. She closed the laptop. She wasn't ready. The DIU Ethics Committee convened. They don't move on Twitter time, they move on stewardship time. They logged inputs, clips, statements, internal steps, external signals. They met with Whitfield line leads, not just executives. They asked welders and analysts how meetings felt, who got credit, who got cut off. They read anonymous submissions. Meanwhile, other primes made their pitches. Some were better on paper, some were better in rooms. It's comforting to pretend that excellence alone wins. Tonight, characters shared the podium, and few people in the old guard knew where to look. Days stretched. The internet found new targets. The hashtag cooled from hard boil to simmer. But the video didn't vanish. It nested in the cultural archive, ready to reappear when needed. Veronica went off-grid for a week, then resurfaced with a post that almost worked. It wasn't quite contrition, not quite defiance. A straddle that satisfied no one. Comments toggled between "too late" and "try harder." She wrote a DM to Jonathan that said only, "You chose them over me." He didn't answer. He was busy choosing the adults the company had to become. In a fluorescent room, Jonathan met with mid-level managers whose promotions had slowed behind flashier hires. He asked what respect would look like in policy form. They told him, promotion panels with external observers, posted salary bands, anonymized reviews for first pass. He greenlit pilots. Meanwhile, a community college near one of their plants pitched an apprenticeship pipeline. HR found budget, finance objected, and then found a different place to cut. That's what change looks like, line items moving, not slogans. In D.C., Roberts read summaries without comment and kept his calendar disciplined. The board appointed an independent chair. Marcus took interim reins. PR tried to sell a glossy magazine on a new Whitfield spread. It died in committee. Good. The company wasn't new. It was trying to be less old. Jonathan kept a standing Friday with plant shifts. 2 at a time, no cameras. People said things that stung and things that helped. He started sleeping again, not well, but without the soundtrack of doom. Veronica's circle contracted to a handful of friends who liked a fight more than a future. Even they checked their watches more often. Then the letter arrived, DIU's ethics panel recommendation. Not a verdict, a map. It acknowledged steps, demanded more, specified timelines. It didn't reinstate anything. It didn't foreclose anything. It sat there like a mirror. You can live with this, or you can stop pretending you care. Jonathan read it twice, then a third time out loud. Marcus nodded. We can do this. Procurement would be harder. Capital would be tight. But the hard thing wasn't money. It was attention. Sustained attention to how people are treated when the clock strikes past the press cycle. Jonathan sent a note to Roberts. Thank you for the clarity. We'll proceed regardless of award outcome. It's the company we should have been. He meant it. That's a small sentence, and a big shift. Roberts replied with a line that belonged on a wall. Integrity that depends on victory is just ambition in dress blues. Jonathan printed it. He taped it above his desk. He finally understood the difference between wanting to win a contract and wanting to deserve one. The first had governed his calendar. The second began to govern his days. Veronica drove back to the city. She passed the Fairmont without looking. Inside the lobby, a charity board had replaced her name on a plaque with someone else's. She didn't see it. She thought about posting a long thread. She didn't. She called her mother. They didn't talk about wine. They talked about the first time Veronica learned that rules bent for her. It was a gentle conversation, and it hurt. That night, in a quiet kitchen, she poured a glass of sparkling water and didn't like how it tasted like nothing. There's no single turning point in a story like this, just a drift from heat toward light. The company kept showing up. DIU kept watching. The internet mostly moved on. Some people never forgave. Some did privately. Most filed the memory and returned to their own lives. The gala rented the ballroom again months later for a different cause. New scandals arrived to compete for bandwidth. But the clip of Cabernet falling in slow motion still lived in countless phones, a portable parable about what happens when contempt meets consequence under chandeliers. In a classroom on base, a young lieutenant played the clip during an ethics session for acquisition officers. Character assessments happen whether you schedule them or not, she said. They talked about power and proximity and how not to confuse access with value. She told them about General Roberts, not the hashtags, the habits. Show up prepared, don't perform anger, make decisions that will read well later, not just now. The lieutenants took notes, some rolled their eyes. All of them would someday pick vendors. Some would remember the wine, enough would to matter. Back in California, a machinist put a new apprentice on a lathe. The kid messed up a half-inch on a throwaway rod. The machinist didn't yell, he taught. Culture is 1,000 tiny choices by people who don't have publicists. In D.C., Roberts finished a long day with a shorter walk and went home to a stack of reading. He didn't think about Veronica. He thought about systems and incentives. He thought about the award process like a circuit. Any corroded contact degrades the whole. Then he stopped thinking about work and ate dinner. Jonathan, no longer CEO, sent a note to employees on his last day in the role. It said thanks more than it said sorry, because thanks recognized their patience and their candor. He walked the floor one more time, shook hands with operators whose names he'd finally learned. Outside, he looked up at the sign he'd once imagined would carry his initials forever. It still might, but if it did, it would mean something different now. He drove to the airport for a commercial flight. He sat in coach and didn't mind. A week later, DIU announced the award, not Whitfield. Another firm with solid tech and a quiet track record of decency took it. The press wrote it as a snub. It wasn't. It was stewardship. Whitfield survived, smaller, chastened, still capable. They won a modest subcontract later, earned on merit, and monitored like a probation. That's recovery, not a standing ovation, a foot in the door you resolve never to slam on someone else's toes. Veronica didn't post about it. She had learned at least that much. Sometimes silence is the start of wisdom. Months passed. The clip resurfaced occasionally when a new scandal echoed the old one. Each time it found fresh eyes and taught the same lesson. At a holiday party, Jonathan stood by a coffee urn and talked shop with a junior engineer who planned to stay. "The work matters," she said. "If we keep proving that, the rest fixes slower. But it fixes." He nodded, grateful for a sentence that fit on an index card. He drove home through rain. He didn't pass the Fairmont. He turned left earlier, toward a smaller street and a lighter house. On a quiet afternoon, Veronica wrote a letter she didn't publish. It was not an apology to the internet. It was one to the waiter, whose hands she'd insulted, to the valet she'd belittled, to the founder she'd diminished. She wrote their roles because she didn't know their names. She put the letter in a drawer. Maybe she'd take it out someday and find them. Maybe she wouldn't. Growth is ugly, private, and slow. The internet won't clap for it. That's fine. The people you pass in hallways will notice anyway, or they won't, and you live accordingly. And in that secure room months earlier, back on the day the path forked, General Dane Roberts had said one last thing before he stood to leave Jonathan with his choices. Heading into last night, he'd said calmly, "Whitfield Defense was our top choice for the UAV award. Your technicals were excellent, your price was competitive, your record was a model." He paused, not unkind, absolutely firm. Was. Then, evenly. "Capability without character is a bet our soldiers can't afford." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sentence did the work. On the table before Jonathan, General Dane Roberts set down a tablet looping the viral clips. Veronica's pour in merciless slow motion, followed by morning hits, where she doubled down with polished venom. "Your wife called me a monkey, Mr. Whitfield, before 300 witnesses." The line played again, colder on repeat. "Then she spent sunrise defending it." Jonathan wanted the carpet to swallow him whole. "General, Veronica doesn't speak for the company. She has no role." "She's the controlling family's spouse," Roberts said. "She broadcasts your house values." Colonel Paula Haynes leaned toward the light. "We've been reviewing your hiring and promotion patterns, Mr. Whitfield. Leadership demographics, pipeline, the practical muscle behind your DEI claims." The liaison, Amanda Carver, opened a folder and slid it across. 5-year snapshot, she said evenly. 3 discrimination cases, 2 settled quietly. 1 finding of hostile environment for Black and Latino employees. Jonathan felt the room tilt. Those were isolated, edge cases we've been correcting. Roberts didn't raise his voice. He let Steele live under calm. Last night suggested the edge is closer to the center. "Osh, let me clarify who I am," Roberts said, rising with unshowy authority. He tapped a wall display, images cascaded to life. Young Dane in basic dusty patrols, field commission, command photos. "I enlisted 25 years ago. 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Earned my bars under fire, climbed, while hearing every slur from people convinced they outranked my humanity." The slideshow advanced. Citations, funerals, promotions. "I learned to treat insults as data about their character, not mine." Jonathan watched, shame burning. The last frame showed 4 stars worth of gravity without a flourish. "I now oversee the Defense Innovation Unit's annual portfolio, roughly $50 billion, Roberts continued, voice controlled, unsentimental. "I personally greenlight or kill the major tech awards moving through the Pentagon, including the autonomous UAV program that could have steadied your company for a decade." The HVAC hummed like a witness. When people underestimate me because of skin, they tell me exactly who they are. Your wife's exhibition wasn't subtle. It was comprehensive. He returned to his chair, tablet dark. The silence in the skiff felt like a held verdict, not a pause. She didn't just expose her own prejudice, Roberts said, hands folded, ring flashing once. She signaled what your firm tolerates, who gets protected, who gets dismissed, the culture you export to subs and troops. Jonathan finally found breath. General, please. She'd been drinking. She's rattled by the numbers. We've never… Alcohol doesn't manufacture racism, Roberts cut in, still even. It unmasks it. Stress doesn't conjure contempt. It reveals what was stored. Haynes slid another page. Decision memo, she said. The UAV Prime has been awarded, final this morning. The name underneath wasn't Whitfield's. Wheat. Northrop Grumman, Amanda said, voice professional, merciless through precision. Jonathan's vision tunneled. 1.2 billion, gone. The rope he'd hoped to climb now held a different climber. Additionally, she added, the department is initiating a comprehensive audit of your existing task orders and IDIQ work. Evidence of discriminatory practice or corrosive culture triggers immediate termination for cause. There was no anger in her tone, only policy. Jonathan felt lineage crumble like plaster. 3 generations, reduced to clips and clauses, because one person insisted hierarchy meant humiliation in public view. There is one step that matters immediately, Roberts said, quieter. Jonathan looked up like a man spotting shore. Anything. Remove Veronica from any tie to Whitfield. Formal, informal, advisory, symbolic. Launch real training with real accountability. Stand up an independent culture oversight panel with external authority. Issue a public statement that actually understands harm, not a hostage note. Jonathan nodded fast. Yes, yes to all. Roberts didn't soften. Even perfect execution won't resurrect the UAV award. That door is sealed. This is triage for whether you belong in this ecosystem at all. He left the Pentagon hollowed, sat in his car staring at notifications. 17 missed calls from Veronica during the meeting, each one a drumbeat of denial. Traffic drifted past the window like indifferent time. When he finally drove home, the living room had been converted to a studio. Rigs, soft boxes, a mic on a boom. Veronica sat with a populist podcaster treating her like a folk hero. I stood for merit, she declared into the lens. For American backbone over performative quotas. Someone had to say what others whisper. Jonathan watched the shovel swing. My family's defended this nation for 7 decades, Veronica continued, cadence sharpened by indignation. We earned those seats with sweat and sacrifice, not diversity tokens. The host nodded, eyes glittering for clicks. So, no regrets? None, she said. I'd do it again tomorrow. Jonathan crossed the frame, pressed the power buttons. Lights coughed to black. We're done, he said. Out. The host stammered, gathered cables in a panic, team scrambling toward the door. Veronica stared, baffled fury building. Jonathan, what is wrong with you? That interview was landing. Metrics were… Do you want to know who you drenched? He asked, voice flat enough to cut. Veronica rolled her eyes. Some quota pick trying to cosplay at a head table. We've been over… General Dane Roberts, Jonathan said. Head of DIU, the man who decides where $50 billion in contracts flows each year. Her expression emptied like a battery. What? The man you called a monkey in front of generals and cameras. He was evaluating us for the UAV. Color fled her face. Impossible. He was just sitting there like he belonged. He did. More than you, Jonathan said, exhausted truth spilling. More than me. He outranked everyone in that room by gravity alone. Veronica collapsed into a chair as realizations spread like frost. The UAV… awarded this morning, Jonathan said. Not to us. She rallied with disbelief. We can explain. Context matters. Explain that my wife is a bigot who humiliates a decorated general at a benefit? He snapped. That our leadership reads worth by pigment? Context won't fix contempt. She drew herself up. I'm not racist. I protected what's ours. By dehumanizing who protects us. His phone buzzed. Bored. Emergency session. Caller ID, Richard Whitfield. Veronica's father rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. 2 hours later, the boardroom brimmed with gravity. Investors, former principals, counsel. Richard sat at the head, face chiseled to stone. "Explain," he said, not loudly, not kindly. Veronica tried the polished tone that charmed donors, but this audience was vaccinated. "Daddy, I defended our reputation. That man was clearly out of place." "That man," said board member Patrice Collins, eyes like ice, "is General Roberts. I served under him in Kandahar. He's unimpeachable." Veronica blanched. Former SecDef William Carr leaned forward. "Have you grasped the damage? 15 clients have already called in reassessment." "This is temporary," Veronica tried. "Once people understand the context," Richard said, syllables slow as a gavel, "is that my daughter humiliated a black general on camera and then toured the morning shows insisting she was the wounded party." "Let's review," Collins said, opening a laptop. Screens filled with her posts, stories, interviews, the victory lap of grievance. Headlines marched, "Heiress doubles down." "Billionaire spouse defends racial slur." "She called him an animal," Collins said flat. On video, in front of Pentagon brass, Veronica reached for patriotic rhetoric. "I was defending American values." Richard's reply was permafrost. "Is racism a national value? Is spitting on a war hero part of the tradition you think we steward?" Silence settled. Collins glanced at counsel. "The EEOC reached out. They're opening a culture inquiry." Carr added, almost clinically, "The department has initiated a full review of our active awards. Any whiff of discriminatory practice translates to termination for cause. This is existential." Eleanor Whitfield, Veronica's mother, broke her quiet at last, voice gentler than the content. "You haven't merely embarrassed yourself. You've endangered livelihoods built over 70 years. Veronica lifted her chin. "I can fix this. I'll apologize, It's past slogans," Richard said. "We're talking triage." Collins tapped another file. "Market impact, down 32% since open. 4 subcontracts gone by lunchtime. Boeing is reevaluating alignment." Carr continued reading the casualty list. "Lockridge paused next week's talks. Raycrest is modeling alternative sources." The numbers were not emotional. They didn't have to be. Richard rose with a slow, deliberate authority that told everyone what the next sentence would be. "By the authority vested in me as chair, I'm removing Veronica Whitfield from all roles. Board, advisory, honorary, effective immediately." "Daddy, you can't." "I can, and I have." He didn't sit. "Your trust distributions are suspended pending a full assessment of damage tied to your actions." Votes rang around the table, unanimous. Eleanor didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. "This has been a pattern," she said softly. "Servers, assistants, drivers, anyone you label beneath you. It ends now." Collins opened a thicker folder. Additional incidents. A 2019 wrongful termination, black engineer, settled for $200,000. 3 internal complaints that vanished into HR mulch. Witness statements about slurs in non-public settings. "This is not a moment, Veronica. It's a record." Carr folded his hands. "The general didn't react to a single pour. He assessed a culture. Then he protected the force accordingly." Veronica scanned faces she'd known since cotillions and ribbon cuttings and realized none were moving to catch her. "Please," she whispered. "This is my family's company." Richard's reply was final. Family implies duty, honor, stewardship," he said. "Leadership means you don't torch the house for applause." Jonathan, who had sat numb and silent, finally spoke. "I've filed for divorce." Veronica stared like she'd been slapped. Jonathan didn't blink. "Papers go out tomorrow." "You can't. I won't watch you drag 3,000 paychecks off a cliff." The meeting adjourned with the slow thunder of chairs. Veronica remained alone with a stack of consequences. Outside, headlines refreshed. Inside, a legacy recalculated itself without her name on any page that mattered anymore. The worst had not arrived. While the Whitfields amputated to save the organism, General Roberts and his team began scoping reforms that would ripple well beyond one company. The question no longer centered on whether Veronica would land on her feet. She would not. It widened. Would procurement finally anchor character next to capability permanently? And could an industry accustomed to rewarding results, regardless of means, learn to ask, who are we empowering? The gala pour was already morphing from scandal to standard-setting case study, one that would outlive every headline. Jonathan drove home through a city that suddenly felt older. In the kitchen, he opened a legal pad and began writing names. Interim chair candidates, outside investigators, community partners with authority, not optics. He listed actions that would hurt, his own transition, public contrition, independent oversight that could veto him. He circled, "Call Robert's office," and underlined it twice. In the margins, he wrote 3 words. Earn it back, not the contract. Trust. He stared at those words until they stopped looking like a slogan and started feeling like orders. Veronica woke to a quieter phone. Sponsors had postponed galas. Boutiques reconsidered partnerships. A favorite restaurant canceled her standing table for renovations. She dialed Margaret and got voicemail. She tried the trainer. He was out of town indefinitely. She told herself it was cowardice, not consequences. In the mirror, the practiced features still assembled. Precision hair, museum makeup, the armor of money. She practiced an apology. The sentences sounded like a closing argument to a jury that wasn't in the room. She deleted the draft and poured coffee with shaking hands. Jonathan met Marcus at headquarters before dawn. They walked the floor without entourage, pausing at machines that outlived CEOs. 2 lines we can keep hot, even if receivables slow, Marcus said, tapping a clipboard. If terms compress, we stagger shifts, not slash. Jonathan nodded. Stand-up listening sessions, no executives presenting. We attend, we shut up. He drafted a note to employees. No excuses, concrete steps, names of people with veto power over the board on culture calls. He wrote, "We will be measured by how we behave when no one's filming." At DIU, Dane Roberts began the deliberate work that lasts longer than headlines. He didn't schedule victory laps. He convened a working group, Haynes, Carver, contracting officers, program leads, tasked with designing permanent character assessments, not performative rubrics, observable behaviors, external reporting lines, workforce metrics tied to award risk. Measure what matters, he said, and stop paying for what corrodes. They debated frequency, enforcement, whistleblower protection that doesn't strand careers. Someone asked about the politics. Roberts kept it simple. We buy capability that won't put rot inside systems we hand to soldiers. Veronica's father sent a car. The ride to headquarters felt longer than childhood. In the executive conference room, portraits stared from walls she used to treat like a mirror. Richard entered, older overnight. "You'll meet with counsel," he said. "You'll sign removals. You will not speak to the press." Veronica started to argue and found no oxygen. Eleanor sat beside her, hands folded, eyes kind. "Accountability isn't cruelty," Eleanor said softly. "It's oxygen for everyone you suffocated." Veronica looked at her mother and saw something she hadn't expected, grief, not anger. Counsel slid documents. Veronica signed, flame by flame, extinguishing the empire she'd assumed was inheritance, not stewardship. A security badge changed color. Email access revoked. The petty indignities felt seismic. When it was done, Richard stood. "You are still our daughter," he said, the words heavier than love. "But this house is under new rules." She wanted to ask who she was without a last name that opened doors. Instead, she asked, "Where do I go?" Eleanor took her hand, old-fashioned and human. "Forward," she said. "It's the only direction that works." That afternoon, DIU issued the UAV announcement. The release read like any other: awardee, value, performance period, no victory dance, no shade. Inside Whitfield, Slack threads lit with shock, anger, resolve. Some employees packed boxes. Others stayed late, building contingency schedules, rewriting supplier terms, calling customers not to pitch, but to listen. HR opened an external hotline, staffed by an independent firm with authority to bypass internal approvals. The junior comms lead drafted a town hall agenda with one rule: questions first. Jonathan rehearsed, saying, "I don't know," without flinching. Veronica drove to the Bay Bridge and sat in traffic, anonymous for the first time. She turned off talk radio. Silence grew teeth. She remembered the valet from a year ago, the one she'd mocked about diplomas, who had an army patch on his key lanyard. She remembered laughing on a patio while a server blinked away something saltier than sunlight. Memory, uninvited, curated its own montage. At a red light, her phone buzzed with a right-wing, exclusive request. She hovered over accept, then closed the app and let the notification die. In D.C., Roberts briefed a small group of congressional staffers. He didn't bring the clip. He brought a framework. Objective checks on culture risk, contract clauses with teeth, early warning indicators. Technical excellence wrapped in contempt is operational debt, he said. It compounds until the system fails, where trust is required. A staffer asked if this was social engineering. No, Roberts said, unruffled. It's supply chain hygiene. He left without quotes, to be chewed by cable shows. He preferred policies that would still function when hashtags changed direction. Marcus led the first listening session on a plant floor, folding chairs between CNCs. No stage, no mic. People spoke. A machinist described a manager who cut off women mid-sentence. A junior engineer recounted a joke that wasn't. A custodian explained how contractors treated her invisible. Marcus didn't defend. He wrote. At the end he said, "Thank you. Next week we return with changes, not promises." 3 days later, that manager was reassigned pending review. The joker was out, and the custodial vendor's contract was rewritten to include dignity clauses with penalties. Veronica's apartment smelled like primer and the previous tenant's dinners. She placed 2 suitcases in a space that didn't care about surnames. She stared at a stack of unopened mail, forwarded from a life she no longer lived. Eleanor called. "Come to dinner," her mother said. "Not to litigate, to eat." Veronica declined and surprised herself by telling the truth. "I'm afraid of the silence after the plates." Eleanor understood. "It will be loud for a while," she said. "Then honest. Loud and honest beats expensive and hollow, any night you want." The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission scheduled interviews. Whitfield's counsel didn't obstruct. Jonathan made a statement to employees. "We will not retaliate against truth." He meant it, then enforced it, once, twice, loudly. HR's leader stepped aside for an outside interim with authority to reopen closed complaints. Finance carved budget for training delivered by people who had never worn Whitfield badges. Someone tried to rebrand the program. Jonathan vetoed the name. "No slogans," he said. "We'll earn nouns later." Behind the scenes, suppliers watched. Some leaned in, others moved on. That's markets. A magazine editor pitched Jonathan on a glossy redemption profile. He said no. "We're not redeemed," he told Marcus. "We're responsible." Instead, he called an old program officer and asked to audit how they treat subs. "Start where trust is thinnest," she advised. Procurement unfroze a small Detroit shop's vendor file and reran the bid honestly. The shop won a pilot. Modest money, meaningful signal. In a plant corridor, a welder told Jonathan, "Keep the cameras away and keep doing that." It was the most valuable endorsement he'd heard in months. Veronica's lawyer explained the prenuptial math. There was less cushion than myth. The condo would go to Jonathan. The art would be appraised. Most pieces weren't hers to claim. A court-ordered community service placement arrived by email. Oakland shelter, 20 hours a week. She bristled, then printed the directions. On day 1, she learned the names of knives, not designers, of schedules, not galas. A volunteer coordinator, unsentimental and kind, handed her a hairnet. "We need hands, not speeches," the woman said. Veronica tied the net and said, "Okay." At DIU, the character framework took shape. Leadership diversity bands, complaint resolution velocity, third-party hotline integrity, subcontractor equity rules, exit interview analysis, random culture audits. Haynes insisted on whistleblower shielding with relocation support. Carver added a score impact that could drag an otherwise perfect technical proposal below the line. "We're not grading vibes," Roberts said. "We're grading behaviors with operational consequences." A skeptic asked if primes would just fake it. Haynes shrugged. "Faking leaves fingerprints. We're building forensics." They named it what it was, Culture Risk Assessment, appended to every major award. The first Whitfield Town Hall began with Jonathan reading names. Employees lost to layoffs after prior contracts slipped. He said each aloud, a small memorial and a promise to avoid more. He explained the UAV outcome without blaming politics. He detailed changes with dates and owners. Questions came hard. Why should we trust you? Why now? He answered plainly, don't yet. Judge us by next Friday's actions and the Friday after. He ended with one ask, hold us to receipts, not rhetoric. The room didn't clap. It didn't walk out either. Veronica's second week at the shelter, she met Marcus, an elderly vet with a cane and a wit that could cut silk. He called her Miss V because he refused to remember last names. She filled out job forms with him, learning the shape of bureaucratic mazes she'd once dismissed from behind frosted glass. You're good at boxes, he said, pointing at the fields. I used to be good at tables, she replied, thinking of placards and centerpieces. Tables feed fewer folks than boxes, he said. For the first time, she laughed honestly. A right-wing host posted Veronica's old clips with fire emojis and an invite to reclaim the narrative. She didn't reply. The silence surprised the host more than any rebuttal. Instead, Veronica drafted a letter she didn't send. To the valet with the army patch, the server on the patio, the founder she'd demeaned. She wrote, I weaponized the room against you. She listed how. She didn't ask forgiveness. She asked for nothing, which is the hardest ask. She put the letters in a drawer she could open only after telling them in person. Whitfield's Supplier Summit met in a Spartan conference room, not a resort ballroom. Jonathan and Marcus listened as small vendors described net 60 terms that acted like choke collars. They renegotiated to net 30 for shops under 50 employees and guaranteed faster pay for on-time quality. A mid-size firm's CEO cried quietly after the session. You just gave me 2 hires, she said. Jonathan told her to hire them and send the names so he could brag internally. It felt like the opposite of performative, a spreadsheet cell that made a human dent. Roberts testified in a closed-door session about the framework. We are not inventing morality, he said. We are enforcing readiness. Culture rot breaks sooner under stress. Combat, cyber intrusion, field failures. We refuse to pay for corrosion. A staffer asked whether companies would sue. They can litigate, Roberts replied. We'll continue buying from partners who keep our people safer. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, policy gained ballast. When he left, he called Haynes. Publish the implementation memo. No adjectives, just requirements. She smiled. My favorite kind of prose, she said, and hit send. Veronica attended a mandatory counseling session as part of community service. The therapist didn't interrogate. She mapped. When did contempt become your default? Veronica started to blame pedigree, pressure, Jonathan, enemies. The therapist kept the pen still. Finally, Veronica said, when people stopped telling me no. She cried in a way that felt unglamorous and medicinal. The therapist offered no absolution, just homework. Do 3 things weekly where your last name is irrelevant. Veronica wrote, ladle soup, fill out forms, clean tables, none would trend. That was the point. At headquarters, the independent chair, Ruth Delgado, a retired aerospace COO in her late 60s with a spine like a keel, took the gavel. She didn't owe Jonathan anything and treated him accordingly. She created a culture and ethics committee with external voting members, authorized to stall any bid if flags appeared. She ordered an audit of succession pipelines. She met with line workers before executives. Steer by the quietest voices, she told the board. Someone rolled their eyes. Ruth turned her head slowly. The eye roller did not repeat the error. An industry panel invited Jonathan to discuss rebuilding after crisis. He sent Marcus instead, with 2 shop owners and the junior comms lead. On stage, Marcus said, don't call it rebuilding, call it repairing harm. The shop owner from Detroit described winning the pilot without a golfing buddy. The comms lead said, stop naming programs after birds. The audience laughed, then wrote it down. Backstage, a competitor's VP shook Marcus's hand. We're stealing your supplier terms. Good, Marcus said. Make it a race we all win. The VP looked surprised and then relieved. Veronica's court date arrived sooner than dread. Outside the courthouse, protesters chanted without ugliness, anger braided with grief. She wore a modest suit that fit like honesty, imperfect, appropriate. Her court-appointed lawyer handed her a statement. She read it as written, voice steady, not defiant. Reporters angled for contrition porn. She gave them nouns: harm, repair, work. She did not say if. She did not say but. The internet still roasted her. Some roastings are earned. Afterward, she walked 2 blocks alone and bought herself a cheap sandwich that tasted like consequences. That afternoon, Roberts faced microphones. He didn't throw elbows. "Mrs. Whitfield's apology is noted," he said. "Our focus remains the same: partners whose behavior under pressure reflects the values we defend." A reporter pushed for gossip. "What about personal forgiveness?" "I don't award that," he said. "I award contracts." The clip traveled well. Calm, beating heat. Principal beating spectacle. In offices and Slack threads, people who hated meetings watched a man make accountability sound like logistics. That night, he made pasta and graded performance reports with the same unflashy precision. Inside Whitfield, Dr. Maya Johnson released Phase 1 of her audit. It was blunt and footnoted, a map of fractures, pay disparities, microaggressions stapled into processes, complaint paths that cul-de-saced. She didn't suggest posters. She suggested scorecards tied to bonuses. Miss the mark, lose money. Jonathan agreed publicly and privately, then watched who flinched. Some did. A talented VP resigned rather than be measured. Ruth shrugged. Standards are magnets and sieves. They posted the report internally with no PR gloss. Coworkers read it, argued about it, and began to implement line items. Veronica's routine hardened into something that felt like life. 6 a.m. bus, shelter prep, paperwork clinic, mop lines, home by 9 to a quiet that no longer scared her. She started sleeping without Chardonnay. She learned volunteers' kids' names. She stopped explaining herself and discovered how much oxygen explanations steal. One night, Marcus insisted she take home an extra sandwich. "You're skinny as pride," he said, laughing. She laughed too, then cried in the stairwell, not because of the sandwich, but because someone had noticed she was there to be noticed. The DIU framework rolled to other agencies faster than pundits predicted. Transportation adapted vendor culture checks for safety contractors. Energy applied it to nuclear maintenance. Education used it on EdTech pilots. Some trade groups screamed about red tape. Others saw liability fall. Insurance underwriters liked the signals. Premiums twitched downward for firms with clean audits. An economist called it the externalities correction nobody asked for, but everyone needed. Roberts ignored the labels. He wanted reliability that survived election cycles. He told his team, "We're building scaffolds, not headlines." They nodded and kept building. Whitfield's numbers stopped falling and started plateauing, ugly, stable, survivable. A mid-tier contract arrived, not glorious, sufficient. The team celebrated with sheet cake under fluorescent lights. Jonathan gave the shortest speech of his life. "Thank you." He shook hands with a quality tech who had almost left. She said, "I'll stay another quarter." That sentence felt like revenue. Marcus posted a photo of the cake on the internal channel with the caption, "This is what not dying looks like." People added emojis no investor deck would include, and then returned to their stations. Veronica attended a workshop on bias with other court-assigned attendees. The facilitator, a black woman about Veronica's age, didn't coddle. "Say the thing," she urged, "then sit with it long enough to notice the instinct to decorate it." Veronica said pieces of truth in sentences she couldn't fix with polish. Envy dressed up as superiority, fear of scarcity at tables conjured to exclude. She listened more than she spoke. Afterward, she cleaned folding chairs. A man in a security uniform told her she stacked them right. "Most folks stack them selfish," he said. Ruth visited the night shift, not for theatrics, but because policies should survive after daylight. She asked the kind of questions that don't make it into minutes. Who talks over you? Who takes credit? Whose absence makes you breathe easier? She left with 3 names and a list of fixes. 2 weeks later, those names had new managers, and the fixes existed in policy, not post-its. Word traveled, quiet and electric. People started testing the hotline with low-stakes complaints to see if it worked. It worked. Trust always starts provincially. Roberts spoke at West Point, not about Veronica, not about scandal, but about leadership that doesn't metastasize under stress. Character isn't decorative, he told the cadets. It's predictive. He described a procurement officer who lowered a price by humiliating a vendor and bought a hidden cost that exploded later. He described a sergeant who ran a platoon on fear and couldn't retain talent. He didn't moralize. He diagrammed failures like maps. Afterward, a plebe asked for a selfie. Roberts obliged and told him to hydrate and ignore loud cowards. A journalist wrote a long piece on Whitfield's transformation. Jonathan gave one quote, "We are mid-repair." The writer spent more time with line workers, the shelter, DIU staffers, and a sub in Detroit than with boardrooms. The story landed without triumphalism. It ended on an image of a plant bulletin board covered in printed receipts of actions taken because someone spoke up. In the comments, internet strangers didn't agree on politics, but they agreed on a sentence. Pay people faster, treat them better, build cleaner things. Sometimes simplicity out-argues spectacle. Veronica finally opened one letter from the drawer and hand-delivered it to the patio server at her old favorite restaurant. The woman had moved to a better job. Veronica waited by the host stand, letter folded twice, palms damp. The server read it in silence, then said, "I believe you're working." She didn't hug Veronica. She didn't spit. She nodded once. Veronica walked to the sidewalk and sat on a bench until her breath matched the street. Not forgiveness, not a scene, just a tiny hinge turning somewhere inside the doorframe. A year's worth of culture risk assessments produced their first measurable batch. Award differentials, corrective actions, disqualifications. A few primes protested loudly, then quietly scrubbed their houses. A handful of small firms rose. Quality followed. Roberts reviewed a quarterly dashboard with the same attention he gave to weather in a war zone. "The graph should be boring," he told Haynes. "Flat lines mean stability." She smirked. "You just asked a Pentagon office to love boring." He nodded. "We can try." They did, and for once, the bureaucracy cooperated with decency. Eleanor visited the shelter on a gray afternoon, pearls and practicality. She didn't sweep in, she signed in. She watched Veronica run a resume clinic, moving gently through bullet points that had never seemed like lifelines before. On the curb, Eleanor said, "I'm proud of who you're practicing to be." Veronica stared at her hands. "I broke everything." "We can sweep, we can build," Eleanor replied. "We cannot rewind." A volunteer called for Miss V. Eleanor smiled at the name. "Answer them," she said. Veronica did, and the moment didn't ask for applause. The internal numbers at Whitfield inched. Leadership now less pale, more varied in schools, geographies, accents. Meetings sounded different. PowerPoint decks had fewer euphemisms. Procurement published quarterly fairness metrics. Someone created a meme, no birds, just receipts. It cluttered Slack, then appeared on a mug that HR pretended not to notice. Jonathan stopped keeping a resignation letter in his desk. He still kept Robert's line taped above his monitor. "Integrity that depends on victory is just ambition in dress blues." It read like both warning and map. He checked it daily. Veronica earned back small privileges the slow way. Unlocking the storage closet, training new volunteers, being trusted to run intake without supervision. None were glamorous. All were clean. Marcus brought her a printed job posting for a state office admin role. "You do boxes like a champ," he said. "Trade the hairnet for a badge." She hesitated. "Would they hire me?" "Ask them," he said. She sent a resume, stripped of famous nouns. The interview panel asked practical questions. For once, Veronica's answers were better without sparkle. She left unsure and oddly calm. Roberts received a briefing on an unrelated program failure. Completely different contractor, completely different tech. The root cause read like culture. Silenced engineer, retaliatory supervisor, falsified test logs. He wrote 2 words in the margin. "See? Again." He forwarded it to the working group with a note. "More evidence the framework isn't moral theater." Haynes replied with a link to an enforcement action the office had just taken. Carver added, "Vendor trying to forum shop an appeal. We're ready." Roberts texted one line, "Stay boring, stay brave." The team sent a thumbs up. Whitfield won a modest award on a program nobody tweets about. It paid well enough, demanded diligence, and came with a mid-year culture audit clause. Jonathan accepted the clause gladly. "Audit us monthly. he told the CO. We'll learn faster. On the plant floor, someone taped the notice next to the time clock with a smiley face drawn by a grease pencil. Guess we can't be jerks, a tech joked. We could, her colleague said, but we'd lose the work. The incentive landed where lectures rarely do, at the paycheck. The young Veronica got the state job. First day, she wore flats and carried a tote instead of a status bag. Her desk had a view of a parking lot and a fern she promised not to kill. She processed permits, answered phones, calmed people who felt invisible. She was good at calming, not with sugary words, but with clear steps. At lunch, she ate a sandwich that didn't require a reservation. When the day ended, she took the bus and didn't feel diminished. There is a freedom in being nobody's spectacle. A year to the week after the pour, a quiet ceremony at the Pentagon promoted Dane Roberts to 4-star. The room applauded like professionals, warm, contained. He thanked mentors, troops, civilian partners. He did not mention Veronica. He mentioned systems and stewardship and the weight of budgets measured in lives. Afterward, he shook hands until the line ended, then took the long hallway back to his office. On the wall, framed memos from boring days reminded him why boring wins, procedures that protect people from somebody's bad afternoon, disguised as leadership. A columnist tried to allegorize the whole saga into a neat timeline. Real life refused. Whitfield's culture didn't become perfect, it became measured. The shelter didn't end homelessness, it made 100 days survivable for 100 people. The DIU framework didn't sterilize corruption, it starved some of it. Veronica didn't become a saint, she became accountable. Jonathan didn't become a hero, he became useful. Roberts didn't become a celebrity, he remained a servant with power and limits. The story's lesson fit on a rubber stamp, receipts over rhetoric. Veronica closed down the clinic one evening and walked Marcus to the corner. He tapped his cane on the curb. You're different than the first day, he said. She shrugged. I'm quieter. Same thing, he said. Quieter leaves room for work. She smiled. Thank you for being unimpressed, he laughed. Child, the army taught me to be unimpressed by everyone. She thought of Roberts, whom she had humiliated and who responded with architecture instead of vengeance. She whispered, to no one particular, I'm sorry, and meant the active verb, not the past tense. Jonathan gave one last interview, months after turning down dozens. He chose a trade journal nobody reads outside the industry and talked about supplier terms, complaint velocity, and the difference between posters and policies. He ended with, our proof is quarterly. The piece got few clicks and many forwards among people who sign invoices. He sent a copy to Ruth, who circled quarterly and wrote, weekly please. He pinned the note to his corkboard. Ambition had a new costume, steady shoes, clear metrics, a tolerance for the unglamorous middle. Roberts visited a test range where the UAV awardee flew a late-stage demo. The aircraft performed beautifully and, more importantly, the team operated in a way that looked like trust. Junior engineers speaking freely, a safety officer interrupting a VP, a debrief where nobody blurred blame. Roberts watched a landing and felt a quiet click inside, the sensation of a decision that had aged well. On the drive back, he called Haynes. Keep the framework dull and inevitable, he said. Roger that, she replied. In other words, institutionalized. He smiled. Exactly. At the shelter, Veronica stacked chairs after a job fair and waved to Marcus. Across town, Jonathan reviewed a culture dashboard with real teeth. In Virginia, Roberts filed a memo no one outside would ever read that still changed futures. None of it trended. All of it mattered. The gala's crimson arc had become a footnote to something larger, an industry learning, inch by verified inch, to pair competence with character. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to claim progress without lying. Boring, stubborn progress. The kind that outlives outrage. Lesson. In America, capability without character collapses fast. One public slur, one glass of Cabernet, and a dynasty unraveled. Those of us over 65 know this truth. Dignity is not decor, it's infrastructure. Treat people right when no one's watching, or risk losing contracts, community, and the future we built. Do you agree that character should weigh as much as capability when companies court public trust and taxpayer dollars? If you were in that ballroom, what would you have done? And what lesson would you share with your kids or grandkids? Drop your thoughts below, tap like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss future stories and practical takeaways.